I do have a brief announcement, and I will try to remember to say it again at the end, but there is an event tonight at 5 o'clock here from 5 to 7:30. There's open taco bar, open tab, so you guys should hang around. Again, I'll try and say something again after the workshop. So who here, just by show of hands, this will kind of help me know what topics to dive into. If I can see, by show of hands, how many people have experience with Redwood? Awesome, this is gonna be fun. How many people have experience with Prisma? Okay, awesome. You guys are gonna love this. Okay, so what we're going to do today is the workshop's gonna be divided into two different parts. So the first part, we're going to be building an entire backend API with Redwood. And then the second part is I'm going to demo some of the experimental features that our team has been working on with React Server components, with live queries, streaming, and real-time. So over the past month, I've been putting together this app, and so you guys can grab the QR code, check it on your computer if you want. We're doing our own RedwoodJS workshop next week, and so you can get a free virtual ticket if you want, or if you want to come to Grants Pass in Southern Oregon, you're more than welcome to join us. But the fun thing about this particular app, I built it in about a month using Redwood, eating our own dog food. And so we're going to build the entire backend API in about an hour or less. So this will be fun. But if you want to grab the QR code, there's that. If you want to check it out on your computer, I'll demo it in a minute. But as I mentioned, we have the RedwoodJS conference. If you want to check that out, I'll wait while all the cameras go off. Perfect. And then that's for our project. Awesome. So my name is Amy Dutton. I am a lead maintainer with the RedwoodJS core team. So the cool thing about Redwood is we bundle a lot of these services together into a framework. So things that you're familiar with, like GraphQL and Prisma, we use, and then we'll also be working with React. So that's one of the reasons that I was interested in Redwood personally, was because it had all of the tech decisions that I would have made anyways, all bundled together. So let's get into it. So I'm going to start by demoing this app if you haven't seen it, or if you're already experimenting with it on your laptop. But the fun part about this is there's a little bit of animation there, but there's an entire backend here that, let's see, I think I can pull this up. That allows us to build these pages for speakers and for partners on the fly. And so here what you're seeing is we're pulling in the speaker dynamically, we're pulling in the code and the discount, and then the registration link dynamically. So I'm gonna just type in my name here, and I'll show you what this looks like. So if I say yes, please, what happens is then it says you're in, and I have the option to connect that with my GitHub account. So if I customize my ticket, this is going to ask let's pull it up over here. It'll go through, and then once you've customized it and authenticated it with GitHub, so I've already done that. That's why you didn't see me go through that entire process. It shows us the OAuth screen. You can share that link on Twitter, you can copy the URL, you can download the image, or you can add it to your calendar. If I share this link with somebody, so I'm going to come back over, you'll see that it actually pulls in RedwoodJS and Amy Haywood Dutton, invite you to the event. So it's pulling in based on the URL. That information. So we're going to build the backend. So to get started, you can run, I'll tell you the command in just a second. Let me pull up my terminal. So this is warp. I'm going to run yarn create redwood-app badge-app, and you can call it whatever you want. I'm going to call this badge-app, and I'm going to hit enter. And it's going to run through the packages. Now, in order for Redwood to work, you have to be using Node 19. See, I'm running 20. I can still go ahead and run it. And we're also using Yarn. If you don't have that on your computer and you're like, I don't want to mess with this setup, you can also use this git pod starter and just run everything within git pod. So I'll leave that up for a second while we're waiting for those packages to install. If you want to do that there, if you want to run it within git pod, that's fine as well. Perfect. So I'm just going to say I want to override. I'm going to stay with version 20. I'm going to use TypeScript, and I'm going to go ahead and initialize a Git repo, and I'm going to use this initial Git message. Perfect. So now I'm going to run these commands. So I'm going to cd into the directory that I just created. I'm going to run yarn install, and this might take a hot second as well to download all the packages. Perfect. This is always fun. And then I can say yarn. I'm saying RW. That's the shorthand instead of saying Redwood for everything. I'm going to say yarn Redwood dev. So now we have Redwood running in a local environment on our machine, and there's the start page. Perfect. So I'm going to open this up in VS Code and can kind of look around. Is that big enough for everybody? Okay. So there's two main directories within Redwood. There's an API directory and there's a web directory. The web directory contains all of the front-end code, and we'll touch in there briefly, but we're also going to hang out quite a bit in the API directory since we're talking about the back end. So the first thing that you'll notice is there is a DB folder here with a schema.prisma folder, or file, excuse me. So here we can set what kind of database we're running. And by default, you have a SQLite database. You can swap this out for Postgres, but I'm just going to keep it easy breezy today, and we'll stick with SQLite. And then down here, I have an example model. And I don't need this right now, so I'm just going to go ahead and comment this out. And for our project that we're building today, I do have a database diagram. So I'll blow this up. If you want to download or view that image on your computer, if the information's too small, I'll pull it back up in a minute. But you can see that it's pretty simple in terms of the back end. Now, granted, I'm not taking care of the users, the auth stuff right now, but there's just two main relationships between the partner and the participant. So participant is somebody that signs up, and then you have a partner type. So you can either be a speaker or a company. So let's start building this out. So if you're familiar with Prisma, this should be familiar syntax for you. So I'm going to set up a partner here, and I'm going to give this an ID, and I want it to be an integer, and I'm going to say that this is the ID for the table, and by default, I want it to auto increment. Nice and easy. Yeah. Yeah, sorry. So great. Yes, please stop me if I start going down a path and you're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So Prisma is a ORM. So what that means is you can use Prisma to kind of abstract the database. So instead of going into, I don't know, say like Supabase and defining each table, I can do that within a file within Prisma and then generate a migration. And Prisma actually has an API that we'll kind of use a little bit when we start building out the other pieces. So is any other questions? Great, thank you for stopping me. I really appreciate that. Okay. So we're also going to say we have a name, and we're going to make this a string. And then I also have a slug, which is a string, and I want this to be unique. So nobody else can have this particular slug. Let's pull this up so it's a little bit easier to read. And then I also have a logo, and this is going to be a string, but that's also optional. So this can be really boring if you watch me type all of this stuff out. So what I want you to do is I'm going to do an exercise, and I'll let you guys see if you can go ahead and build this out based on kind of what I just typed. And I'll walk around, I can help. I'll give you about 10 or 15 minutes. I'll come back and explain, so if you get stuck, it's not a problem. But I'll try and have these different exercises so that it's more of a hands-on experience. Okay, I'm going to keep moving along. If you're like, oh goodness, this is lots of typing, focus on the partner type table. That's the smallest table, and that's the one that I'm going to focus a lot of my energy on because it is the smallest table. So I'm cheating, and I'm going to copy this from my notes, and I'm going to paste this guy in. Okay, so I'm going to kind of talk through some of the highlights. If you're not familiar with Prisma, hopefully this will help a little bit. But what we did here was we have the name of our model, and then we have the name of the column, and then here we're saying what type it is. So there's really only 3 types that we're highlighting. We're highlighting an integer, a string, and a date time. And the things that are not required have a question mark. Now you'll also see there's a few other like weird things. And these weird things, all they're doing is you're establishing a relationship. So within Prisma, I'm saying, hey, I want to connect the partner table here to our participants table. So when I'm looking for participants, I want it to return a type of an array of participants. You can see that's related. But then you also have to tell Prisma how those two things are connected. So if I come down here under participant, there's almost a corresponding column here where, let's see, this is a partner table. So down here I have partner, and it's referencing the partner table, and I'm establishing how that relationship gets set up. So I'm saying that the relationship is connected through these two fields. So we have the field partner ID, which is right here, and that's an integer, and we're referencing an ID on this table. So it might be a little confusing in terms of the syntax, but if you dig deep into Prisma, I would encourage you to get the VS Code extension because it will highlight a lot of those things and give you fantastic IntelliSense. It's actually probably one of the best extensions that I've seen in terms of IntelliSense for being able to write stuff out quickly. The other thing that you can do is you can also establish defaults. So with the created at, we're saying that we want the default to be set to now. Okay, is there anything, I know this is kind of fast in terms of Prisma, is there anything that you want me to cover or any syntax that looks really strange? I'm also happy to go back over the relationship thing because I know I breezed through that. Okay, perfect. So now that we've established our models, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this a save, and I'm going to come back over to the terminal, and now I have to run my migration. So I just want to make sure everybody knows what that is, but a migration allows you to really work with somebody else on the team. So if I'm, say, just adding stuff to my own database, and then somebody else is working on the same project, and I change a column, that would mess up their code. So a migration would tell them, these are the changes that I made, and these are the things that need to change on your machine when you get ready to update your project. And that allows us to work in tandem. So I'm going to say yarn, Redwood, Prisma, migrate dev, and that will create the migration. It's going to ask me what I want to name it. So I'm going to say initialize, if I can spell initialize, database, give that a return. So what did that create? Well, I'm going to come back over to my folder. I now have migrations folder, and you'll notice that this folder name lines up with what we just created. So there's a timestamp here, and then it has initialized database, and this wrote all the SQL for me, so I don't have to write SQL. I don't know about you, but I don't like writing SQL, so this makes it a lot easier. So now let's come back over to our database, our terminal, and let's say yarn Redwood Prisma Studio. So one of the things about Redwood is that it wraps a lot of these services that you might have to string together yourself. But in this case, we're running Prisma Studio. And so here you can see all of the models that we just created. Here, I can make this a little bit bigger. So if I come into partner type here, you can see there's all the column names. And I'm going to go ahead and add a record. So this makes it really easy to scaffold out your data, especially early on. So here I have a speaker, and I also want to have a company. So those are my two types. So I'm going to click Save Changes. Make sure that gets saved. Perfect. So now I have my couple entries in my database. So let's come back over to our terminal. Now, when we ran yarn Redwood dev, what that did was that created our own Redwood project here on port 8910. Well, if you look at the terminal, we also have 8911 open. So I'm going to click on that, and you can actually go to 8911/GraphQL, and it's running a GraphQL playground for you. So if I click on documentation, that's strange. None of my content is there that we just created for our database. So what we need to do is I'm going to come over to the terminal, and we can run yarn Redwood. Let's not do that here. I'm going to quit the studio. There we go. Yarn Redwood generate. So I could type that out if I wanted, but you can also do G for short. Generate SDL participants. I'm going to hit enter. And this is going to generate a bunch of files for me. Now, you may have noticed there's a few errors here. What is all of this? Well, what it's saying is it's giving me a heads up to say, hey, you generated participants, But you have relationships with partners that don't exist, and you have relationships with partner types that don't exist. So I'm also going to say yarn Redwood generate SDL partners, and that will generate more files for me. And I'm going to do the same thing, except this time I'm going to say partner types. So now when I run it, you shouldn't see any errors. Is everybody good? That's a good question. I always run them independently. I'm not sure if there's one that just runs through everything. And I think part of the reason is because there are certain things that you may want to protect in terms of data and security. You don't necessarily want to expose everything in your database. Yes? What database is running? I didn't set up a database. Yeah, so right now I'm running a SQLite database. If I come back over at the top of my schema.prisma file, I have a SQLite. But you can easily swap this out for Postgres. And you can even swap it out down the road. So if I wanted to change this to Postgres here, and then all I would need to do is that within my environmental variable files, you can see I can comment out these 2 lines and just set up my Postgres database. Okay. Perfect. So now I'm going to come back over to my GraphQL playground. I'm going to hit refresh, and now when I check out the docs, there's all my tables. And I'm going to come in here to partner types that we created some content on. I'm going to say my ID and my name, and there's my data. Any questions? Yeah?
If I change my database schema, how do I update Redwood SDL to match that?
Yes, good question. So he asked if you change your, I'm sorry, I'm repeating your question for the video too. So he was asking if you change your schema, what do you do now? How does that get reflected in the database? So what you would do is if you came over here and made some changes, let me make a change so I can show you. So I have OG image, maybe I do OG description. And so this will be a string. So hit save. And now if I come back over to the terminal and I would say yarn Redwood Prisma migrate dev again, and it's going to create a new migration. And say I could say added OG description, and so that gets updated. Now to your point, you had asked about generating those SDL files. You do have to go back and either regenerate those files or you add that manually to the SDL file, which I'll show you in just a second. Actually, yeah, that's fine. Cool. So what that did when we ran the SDL files is if you look in source, there's a GraphQL folder and there's a services folder. And so when we ran the generate SDL file, it generated these 6 files for us. So let's take a look at what's inside. So if I look at partner types, you can see here is some GraphQL. There's a partner type that establishes I have a query and I have my inputs for my mutations, and then here I'm defining those mutations. Then if I come down here to partner types, I also have my services. So these names actually correspond with the same names that are in my SDL file. So if I look over here, it has a create partner type, and this is actually a Prisma query with their API. And then I have an update partner type, I have a delete partner type. So it generated all these CRUD operations for me. So I don't know about you, but I love GraphQL, but that's probably been one of the most frustrating parts is trying to write all of the CRUD code that goes along with it, and the fact that that gets generated for me is pretty stellar. Is everybody?
Let's say I have a table, but I don't want to expose one of the columns.
Yep. Yeah, so all you have to do is you can just remove, let's see if we come up here, and to say partners. If you don't want to expose the email, let's see, their name, you could take that out there. But I'll also show you something else. On the query, there's a require auth. So it's not like your data is just free floating out there. It does require a bearer token and a special way to connect. Now, if you are deving and you keep hitting this wall of auth, what you can do is you can also change this directive to be skip auth. So a lot of times that's what I'll do, and then at the end of the project, I'll go back through it and tighten everything up and just lock it. So this also allows you to create custom directives if you want. Okay, so let's create a custom call here. So what I want to do is I'm going to come over to our partner, and I'm going to take a look at our SDL file first. And when I query for a partner, it's querying by ID, so I have to know the ID of the partner. Well, if we looked at my project, I don't want to expose all those IDs, or when I'm sending them out in social media, I don't want to type crazy letters. I just want some, if you're using a UUID, I just want it to be like /Amy or /Prisma or /RedwoodJS. So I want to be able to search by the slug. So what we can do is I can say partner by slug, and I'm going to pass in a slug, and I want this to be a string. I want it to return a partner, and I'm going to skip the auth for right now. Is everybody good? And then I'm going to jump over to the partners, let's see, partners.ts file. And I actually have to write the code to go along with it. So I'm going to use the same name here, partner by slug. So give that a copy. And come over here, and where I'm searching for a partner by ID, I can actually just copy this code, paste that in. I'm going to paste in that partner by slug. Now, instead of passing in an ID, I'm going to pass in the slug, where I want the slug to match the slug. So again, this is using the Prisma API, using their query language. Perfect. So I'm going to do another exercise. And again, if this is kind of going off the deep end, I'll walk around and help, and also we'll walk through all of this. But see if you can write the 3 remaining resolvers. We want partners by speakers only, partners by companies only, and then count participants. And the count participants one is kind of a stretch. So again, we'll cover it. Don't worry about it if you have trouble. Okay, I'm going to start writing code. So if you haven't finished, you can kind of follow along and maybe fill in the gaps. So the first one that we want to do is we want to do partners by speaker only. So I'm going to come into my partners.sdl file. And under query here, I want to add partners, speakers only. And I want this to return a type of partner. So this syntax looks funny. What that means is it's going to force the inside to be a partner, and it's going to force it to be an array. So that's why there's double exclamation points. And then I'm going to skip the auth. And then let's jump down to partners.ts, so we can save that. And we want to say export const partners speakers only. And here, I want to return db.partner.findMany, and I can use this where clause, and I want the partner type ID to be 1. Does that make sense to everybody? Cool. So the next part is very similar, except we're going to do companies. So I'm actually going to just copy and paste, because the only difference here, is going to be 2. We can change the name here. We also need to update our SDL. So we'll need to duplicate this line to be companies only. Okay, so this one's the more tricky one. So we are going to count the participants. So I want to know how many participants signed up using a particular partner. So let's go to our partners.ts file. And this is going to be part of the relationships resolvers down here. So we actually don't need to add anything to our SDL file. And I'm going to say count participants. And we can use the same syntax up here, except I do want this to be async. And inside, we can say return db participant dot count, where our partner ID is equal to the root ID. So what this does is allows us to access the parameters, the elements that were on the root element. So our root element is like the general partner that we called up here with our query. And so that gets passed down into this subquery. And so now if we come back over to our GraphQL playground and hit refresh, we should see under partners, I think that's right, might be, make sure I did that right. Under partners, there we go. Should be under there. I might, oh, you might have to restart the server. Let's hope this works. Did not. I think I have an error, type error. Oh, thank you. And that, I should have noticed the red squiggly. Thank you. So it should be there. I'll keep moving on, but that's generally how you do it. Now, somebody did ask when I was walking around some of these type errors that you get. Now, what's cool about Redwood is it will actually generate your types for you. So if I pull up the terminal, I can say yarn Redwood generate types. I don't think it'll resolve this particular issue, but what that does is it goes through and looks at your code and rewrites all the types that you need. So you can see these are all the things that it rewrote based on whatever new queries or mutations that you write. Okay, so how do we actually display this information? So this is getting into that React server components piece that I know everybody's excited about. So let's check the front end. So one of the things I want to do is let's say yarn Redwood generate cell. And cell is a concept that's very unique and specific to Redwood. So when this generates, when this runs, what this creates is, so now we're in our web folder. We have a partner type cell. So when you're working with React and you go grab some information, you have to write checks to see what is the state. Are we loading? Are we empty? Did it fail? Did it succeed? And so you have to write all these different conditionals. Well, with a cell inside of Redwood, what that does is it handles all those states for you, and then will return the appropriate component based on the state. So as long as you leave these names alone, it will return what component should be displayed. So if it's loading, it'll display loading, or empty and failed, success. So here at the top, you'll notice I have my query that it generated for me. So I'm going to add name. You can modify that query to include whatever data you need. And then here at the bottom, it's going to return that if it was successful and display it in a JSON format. So I need a page to actually stick this on. So in the terminal, I'm going to say yarn Redwood generate page, and let's generate a partners page. So now if we come back over to our home page that we created earlier, you can change whatever the default page you want within the router, and I'll show you where that lives. But you can see it automatically updated to say, here's your list of pages. And I can click on my partners page, and here is the code that it generated. So now within our code, let's go into pages. We have our partners page. And so here I want to add, actually let's leave our H1 there. I'm going to add my partner type cells. And we also need to import this here at the top. So there is our partner type with our speaker and our company. So you can see it's already returning all of our information. Any questions? Yeah. Yep, happy to. Okay, so what we did was we generated a partner type cell. And so to run that command, I called yarn Redwood generate cell partner types. I'm not going to hit enter. Actually, it'll error if I do that because it says it already exists. And so it created this folder here that has a cell inside. And there's several different things happening. I have a GraphQL query. I have a loading component, an empty component, a fail component, and success component. So I don't have to do anything to say, deliver this component when it's loading. Redwood is smart enough, there's magic going on a little bit under the hood, to say, deliver this component at the appropriate time. So the only thing that I really changed in this file from what Redwood generated for me was I added name to the query so that I could see what name is being returned, not just the ID. Then I want to display this on the front end. So I made a similar call in the terminal that said yarn Redwood generate page partners. And so what that does is that creates another folder here. And you could create all these files by yourself if you wanted. You don't have to use the generators. I think it's a little bit faster, so I generally use it. Sometimes it's like hard to keep up maybe with all the things that are available, but once you know that there's about 5 or 6 calls, it makes it a little bit easier to remember. Yeah. No, you could generate page. I could generate a page right now if I wanted. We could generate one for participants, and that would be fine. Mm-hmm. Yep. And so when you create a cell, that's really when you're just trying to grab data from the database. That's the only time you create a cell, is it's querying the database, and you're going to need it to handle those states for you. So back to your question, what I did with that partners page then was I just imported that partner type cell component. So that's a React component, and it's getting imported. And then that's really it. It was smart enough to say, I'm going to go and I'm going to make that query, and here's the success. Now, as you're creating your front end, which we're not going to focus on too much here, but you can change the success component so you could style whatever that result looks like. Right now, it's just stringifying the content that comes back from GraphQL for you, but you could put whatever component you want there. Yeah?
Is the routing file-based, or does it automatically add an entry to like that routes file too?
Yeah. Great question. That's actually where we're moving to next. So there is a routes file here, and if you're familiar with Rails or a lot of these other frameworks, this might look similar. So what this did was it automatically created these 2 route components here, one for participants and one for partners. And you can see it also gave them a unique name, and it's referencing what page they're going to be on. See, I'll spare you guys the next exercise, and I'll just keep going if everybody's good. Okay, cool. So we're actually going to take this, and we'll come back to the router, because I do want to point out a few things, but I do want to show off the studio. So Redwood Studio will go through, and it'll show you all the data that's running through your app as you're making these calls to the pages, as they're refreshing. How long is the data taking? How many calls are being made? That kind of thing. So in the terminal, I'm going to run yarn Redwood, and this is an experimental feature. So I'm going to say experimental studio. So this is just a warning up there saying this is experimental. It's going to run, grab everything it needs. Perfect. So here's studio. And we're not going to go through everything that's over here. There's a lot of great stuff. But I will point out a few things. So there's an overview here. It also has information about performance and any error handling, things like that. One of the things that we can do is, I'm going to pull up another terminal instance here. We have to set up telemetry in order for this to work properly. So I'm going to say yarn Redwood experimental setup open telemetry. And it's saying, hey, it's experimental. Are you okay with that? Totally fine. So I'll add a few API packages, and it looks like we're good to go. So hopefully this will cooperate with me. So if I do a few things, let's make sure that this is loading. Perfect. I'm going to just create a little bit of data here. Yep. So now it tells me all kinds of information about my application, what calls are being made. You can go deep on this, what the database calls are. There's also information here with traces, so you can see how many Prisma calls, what Redwood service is being run. And there's a wealth of information there as you're trying to tighten up the performance on your app. And then I will highlight this feature just because I was super impressed with what the team built. With the app that I showed earlier, the badge app, it will send out a transactional email. As soon as a participant registers, they'll get an email that says, here's your registration information. So you can't see it here because I'm not using email, but what it does is allows you to preview the templates that you set up within your code directly within the browser. And then when you send out a transactional email, it will capture that email and display it here. So you're not trying to go back to Google, hit refresh, check your spam, where'd that email go? It captures that email for you and you can preview what that looks like within the browser, which is pretty cool. Okay, so we talked briefly about auth. Oh, sorry, you got a question? That's a good question. I will have to get back to you on that. Yeah. I'm sure it gets stored somewhere like that. And if you click through there, it does look like there's options here for cloud stuff. And you know what? I'm not going to pull it up right now. But you could pull up the database, especially if you have like a beekeeper or something like that to check. But that's a great question. Cool. So we're going to set up auth on this. And then that'll highlight some of the router functionality that you were asking about. So what we're going to do in the terminal here is run yarn redwood setup auth db auth. So we support a whole bunch of different auth setups. You don't have to use our auth. If you want to use GitHub or Google or whatever, that's fine. But this auth will allow you to use your own database. So I'm going to hit enter. And this is also very neat. With the Redwood auth, it will ask you, do you want to use web auth in, which is like your biometrics. If you want to use face scan or fingerprint, that's all included. I'm going to say no for now, but that is all built in. So it's going to install a few packages. And so now if you look at this, let me pull this up. There's a little bit of information here when it was setting up. So it says, hey, you'll need to add this model to your Prisma schema. So I'm going to copy this, go over to my Prisma schema, and we commented out this user example. I'm going to go ahead and paste that in. And then we can get rid of that comment. So it's going to add an ID, an email, a hash password, salt, a reset token. So I'm going to give this a save. And then you have to migrate your database. Somebody was asking about that earlier. Yarn, Redwood, migrate, Prisma, migrate dev. Added auth. And now I'm going, if you look at the example that was way up here, it also says, gives you this command to run, yarn, Redwood, generate db auth. If you run that, that will generate all of your pages for you. So that'll generate your sign-up page, your login page, all that good stuff. So this is asking, would you like the username label to be username? So you could change that to email if you wanted. I'm fine with username. I'm fine with password. We didn't add web auth in. Okay, so now let's go ahead and I'm going to restart my server just in case. Come up here. Okay, so you'll see now on the start screen, I have several pages. I can go over to our sign up page. And this is a page that Redwood generated for me, so you can restyle that if you want, if you don't like their styles. And I'm going to sign up. And click sign in, sign up. Okay, so the reason that I got this error is because it's looking for the home page, and we haven't created that yet. If you look in the routes file, there's no home page. So if you specified that, that wouldn't be a problem, but you can also change where you want a user to be redirected as soon as they log in. So I'm going to go over to our login page now. Oh, it wants me to have a home page. Let's change our participants page. Perfect. Oh, I messed it up. Give me just a second. Perfect. So I'm going to log in now using the credentials that I just added. Oh, and then it says login. Perfect. Okay, so now what we can do is we can come over to our router. And one of the neat things about this is you'll see that this added, it says I want to use auth, so it generated that code for me. And I can also wrap if I wanted to protect these two pages. So I can say set wrap, and I could create, say, a layout here if I want to call this admin layout. I'll have to generate that. Just a second, there we go. And I can also set this to be private. So you can't access these unless you're authenticated. I'll close our private tag. We have to import these. Set, and then I also have to generate that layout. Perfect. And then we have to import this. Now that we have that set up. Okay, so let me recap because I know I was moving a little fast there. What I did was I wrapped these two routes with a set tag, and I said that I wanted it to include this admin layout. So that makes it really nice if you have like these nested components that you just want to go ahead and wrap your layouts with. One of the things that I like about this particular format with the router file is that it's not necessarily based on your file structure, so you don't have to worry about, is this file in the right place? You can reference it. You can stick files with certain patterns in different places. Does that make sense? So what I'm talking about, let me give you an example. Other frameworks, won't name names, but like you, you have, say, like a marketing layout. So you have to stick it inside a marketing folder, but you don't necessarily want your slug, your URL structure to match that. So then you might have another file somewhere else, and you have to either create a wrapper layout, you have to figure out some way to get your layout to still apply to that file, even though it's in a different folder. So this way, you can wrap your components without worrying about it messing up your URL structure. Then I also wrapped it with a private component, and I said, if you're unauthenticated, then I want to send the user back to the login screen. So it handles all of that auth logic for you so that you don't have to. Cool, so if I save this, I think this is still going to be weird. Or I'm unauthenticated. Let me see. I'm going to come back over. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's good. I'll include the final repo, because I think I have a bug somewhere. Is it? Oh, thank you. Right here. Saved it. Thank you. I appreciate that. Awesome. Cool. So that is all working. I'm logged in. Now we could go over to the layout and add a logout button if you wanted to. I'm going to keep moving because it's 4 o'clock. I want to make sure we talk about React Server components. So that's kind of the fun stuff, right? Okay, so this next section, this is traditionally how you build stuff within Redwood. And we're moving into an era now where people are really excited about React server components. And so moving forward, you'll be able to make these calls on the server to be able to pass information back and forth. So this is like the intermission. Now we'll move on. Okay, so I'm going to close this stuff out. The first demo that I'm going to show you, let me close this. Okay, so the state of where we're at right now is that you have to say yarn redwood build and yarn redwood serve. So it's not actively watching your files. So I'm sure the user experience, the dev experience will improve. But with this particular demo, what we're doing, and I'm going to pull up, this is going to be on localhost 8910. So this is a demo showing that Redwood components with the server, React server components are running. So this is a server component, and this is a client component. And you can increment the timer, or counter. So if I come back over here, you can see that I have my counter component here. I say use client at the top. So that's what's specifying it as a client component. And then down here, it is incrementing every time I click on the increment button. Now, right now, just the way that things are working, obviously this will improve, but we have our app TSX file here, and this is where it is calling, you can see this is the server component, and that's my counter component. So you can see that's how we're specifying that this is a client component. Okay, let me show you something a little bit more complicated. So I'm going to come back over. Let's go to our second demo here. Okay, so what this one is doing, I think I did it too early. Got trigger happy. Okay, so we have another server component with a client component inside. This one's a little bit more interesting because I can still use this counter to increment, but now I can increment the server counter by 6. So you can see I have a client component interacting with a server component. So if I increment again, it's going to go up to 12, which is pretty cool. So if I come back over to VS Code, and I'll show you what we're looking at. So here is our server action counter, and this is using the client. And we have a button here. And what's interesting about this particular button is that there is a mutate function here that tells the server that it's mutating the state, and that lets the Redwood app know that it needs to be refreshed and show new state. So it's passing information back and forth. And if you look at the functions file that's running, there's use server at the top that lets the system know that this is a server function. And that's where that increment function is running. And then we also have app here. So you can see that's the server component, and that's where that client component's living. Yeah. That's right. That's right. And actually, I think the next demo, it has that in there. I'll pull that up. So let me pull up demo 3. Give that a minute. So if I hit refresh here, it's going to increment the client counter, and then it says loading there. So that's where you're getting your async information. It's waiting for it. So if we look at the code, there's not a mutate function there. It is using async. So if we come down here, you can see there's the async to say that it's updating the server information. But again, this particular component is a client component that's then interacting with the server. Okay, and then I have another demo to show you. So this one's kind of interesting. It is using AI. So I'm going to pull this up. So this is just setting up a basic chat, and I'm going to say like, hello world, hit send, and it'll respond and stream that information back. What do you think about GraphQL? It's interesting indeed. So if you come back over to VS Code now, kind of look at the code. Now the thing that I want to point out here is that we're using Fixie, which has AI JSX, and these are server components that work with Next and their React Server Component Library. So we're importing those and then using those within our code. Cool. I'm going to show you a few more things. So that's the React Server components. It's still being actively worked on, so right now you can't use it in the router. It doesn't cover authentication, but we're getting there. So cool. So this one, let me pull up my notes, is at the very bottom. So we've been doing some stuff with live queries, streaming, subscriptions. So in this particular, example, it's doing a countdown timer. So you can change this to whatever you want, change it how you want it to count down. Now, you could say, oh, you can set intervals or whatever, but this information is actually all streaming from GraphQL, from the server. Yeah, so if you, I'll pull this up. Some of this, let me see. Find it. So this is using the use subscription code. And if I come down, let me see. There we go. So there's the call that it's subscribing to that particular information and then displaying it back. Let me show you another one that's a little bit more complicated. So we have an auction, and this lets you bid on items. So, and then if you were on a different machine and bidding, it would come through. So, and you can see here that it's, all that information is coming. This is using live queries. So I can pull that code up. Let's see. So this is mutating and creating a bid, and then we have our query here, and we have this @live directive that allows that to pull from. And the next one I'll show you is the chat. So this is using subscriptions as well. You can type a message, YOLO from Amy, and you can set what room you want to send that to. And then again, this is coming from subscriptions, as you're subscribed to each individual room. I can pull that code up as well. So with this one, as I mentioned, they're subscribing to each room. So I think, I'm trying to remember where this code is. Might be within the chat room. Yeah, there's a subscription line right there to be able to make that query and push it back to the user. Do what now? Oh, I said it twice. I clicked on the button twice, yeah. Thanks for checking. So if I say YOLOs, there it goes again. Yeah, I got trigger happy on that one. Okay, and then let's pull up the last, There's 2 more demos with AI. So we have a bedtime story where you can pick different adjectives. So we can say there's an adventurous brown bee that buys ice cream, and then it'll stream all of that data back from OpenAI. And if you look at the call here, you can see as each snippet comes back from OpenAI. So this is working similar to what I already demoed with subscriptions, and then we also have one similar with live queries. So the UI on this one's fantastic. But this one allows you to mash up 2 different movies. So if we said we want to mash up E.T. with Dumb and Dumber, create a new movie treatment, it will, using live query, grab all of that information and create a new treatment. I'm sorry?
Which repo?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked. So I have that. I get rid of my... Pull this back up. I think I have it highlighted. Oh, that's the ticket badge app. Let me pull this one up. So if you go to github.com/RedwoodJS, you can find all of these things. You can find that all the complete code for the ticket app that we worked on. That's all open source. You can find that. You can find these streaming demos. You can also find the React Server component demos that I showed you as well. So if you want, here is a QR code. I'll make this bigger. Not this one. Hold on. This one's for the ticket app if you want it. What I was going to show you is this one here. If you fill out the form here, I will send you all my notes that list out all the examples and all the links and things like that. So that has more details than these slides here, but that'll get you, I think, what you're looking for. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.